In 2011, a district court in Lago Agrio, Ecuador found the Chevron Corporation guilty of toxic waste pollution in the Amazon basin. The court ruled that Chevron must pay a $9 billion settlement for serious health effects on the local population, and also importantly for damaging indigenous cultures. The Lago Agrio lawsuit had the potential to be a groundbreaking case for indigenous people seeking reparations from powerful multinational corporations, like Chevron. Instead, as the case unfolded, clear divisions emerged between the indigenous people of the Amazon basin and the legal system itself. Locally, events showed the obstacles that indigenous people face in navigating the legal systems imposed on them within a country like Ecuador. And more broadly, the case revealed a divide between the global south, where these indigenous people live, and the global north, where corporations like Chevron are located. This raises many questions of procedural justice, which concerns the fairness and transparency of processes by which decisions are made. As it will be shown in this video, the legal process was neither fair nor transparent for the indigenous people of the Amazon basin. The population impacted by the pollution is often referred to as afectados, or the affected ones. Afectados include indigenous groups such as the Waorani tribe. These tribes have lived in the Amazon basin for countless generations, making a subsistence living off the land and river by hunting, fishing, gathering, and growing. Tribes such as the Waorani lost their control over the Amazon basin when the Texaco Corporation moved in and began drilling operations in 1972. Texaco drilled in the Amazon basin until 1989. The Chevron Corporation acquired Texaco in 2001, along with all its potential liabilities. Oil development and pollution by Texaco devastated the way of life of indigenous tribes. Rainforest habitats which provided for hunting and gathering were broken up and reduced. Oil fields were inundated with pollution, which continuously seeps into the water, ground, and air. These oil fields cover an area about the size of Rhode Island. From their main pipeline alone, Texaco spilled more than twice the amount of oil spilled at the Exxon Valdez spill. People and wildlife have experienced severe problems, including malnutrition, skin rashes, memory loss, headaches, fevers, miscarriage, birth defects, and cancer. The public health problems and damage to the quality of life of afectados are a violation of principles of distributive justice. Indigenous groups were forced to live in the pollution caused by Texaco, which had the support of the Ecuadorian government. Many indigenous groups were left out of decision-making processes or deceptively bought off by government-backed groups pressing for assimilation. Distributive justice contends that those who bear unequal burdens should receive compensation for them. Indigenous groups paid the cost for Texaco's drilling in health damages and the loss of their way of life. Therefore, they should receive compensation. On March 4, 2014, the $9 billion Ecuadorian settlement for the Amazon basin fell apart when a New York district court ruled that American courts could not be used to collect the money. This settlement was needed to help tribes like the Waorani restore their old way of life. Judge Lewis Kaplan ruled that the Lago Agrio settlement was obtained by corrupt means. He determined that the plaintiffs, led by New York lawyer Stephen Donziger, had engaged in fraud and corruption, which included evidence manipulation and a $500 million bribe to an Ecuadorian judge, among other charges. The Chevron Corporation called the New York decision a resounding victory. Judith Kimmerling, an advocate for indigenous groups of the Amazon basin, has called the ruling heartbreaking. Advocates for indigenous people fear that Chevron will use the ruling to try to discredit victims' claims and jeopardize needed environmental reparations. Stephen Donziger and his New York law firm represented the case starting in 2003, when they filed a civil action suit against Chevron for damages caused by Texaco. Ecuadorian law mandates that only one case is allowed to be brought to trial on behalf of the whole Amazon basin. The Amazon Defense Front, then, became the group that would distribute any rewards from Donziger's case. Advocates for indigenous people claim that the Amazon Defense Front was organized without properly consulting them. Judith Kimmerling alleges that 4 affected indigenous groups do not recognize the Amazon Defense Front as their representative, and that Donziger's group undemocratically monopolized representation in the case. One Waorani tribe member said of the Amazon Defense Front that they speak for all, but work with only a few. The indigenous people were not given the opportunity for participation in their own representation. This is required by procedural justice. Without full participation by all involved groups, no proceeding can be considered just under the rules of procedural justice. A new lawsuit against Donziger, filed by Judith Kimmerling and Catherine Lee Crawford on behalf of indigenous peoples, charges that Donziger has not ensured the collected money in various cases reaches indigenous peoples. If this case is successful, it could give indigenous people their own day in court. Yet, indigenous peoples have not only been underrepresented in the case, but their single best opportunity for justice was mismanaged by Donziger and the Amazon Defense Front. Donziger's case in U.S. courts began to unravel when outtakes from the Joseph Berlinger documentary Crude were discovered by a court order. The outtakes gave an intimate and extensive look at the corruption that occurred within the Ecuadorian courts. In the outtakes, Donziger is caught saying that all Ecuadorian judges are corrupt, and you can solve anything with politics as long as the judges are intelligent enough to understand the politics.
This is something you would never do in the United States. But Ecuador, this is how the game is played. It's dirty.
In the film itself, Donziger warns about the same kind of corruption by Chevron's lawyers. Be careful with the Texaco lawyers, he tells an Ecuadorian judge at one point. They play dirty. The U.S. judge in the RICO case criticized in his ruling what he called Donziger's "this is the way it is done in Ecuador" excuses. The judge believed they were a remarkable insult to the people of Ecuador and do not help Donziger's case. Whether Donziger's political manipulations were necessary or not, they demonstrate the inadequacies of the Ecuadorian legal system. Procedural justice demands that proceedings be fairly and properly conducted, by agreed-upon rules for their outcomes to be considered just. The corruption and general bad practice of the Ecuadorian legal system prevented a just decision for indigenous groups. The indigenous have to live with the New York ruling on Donziger's corruption, even though they do not claim to be represented by Donziger's group. The Ecuadorian courts that have colonized justice for the Amazon's indigenous people were not able to deliver a resolution. This all raises questions of internal colonialism. Internal colonialism describes when a majority group within a country or region dominates a minority group by means similar to the workings of colonialism. Indigenous groups in the Amazon basin have been colonized by the Ecuadorian legal system and policies of assimilation imposed on them by Ecuador. The Ecuadorian government encouraged assimilation in the Amazon basin with new roads, settlements, and laws. They did so to encourage more and more lucrative drilling by Texaco. The legal system has enforced this. Even decades later, indigenous people are unable to bring their own case against the oil companies. This led to their misrepresentation by Stephen Donziger and the Amazon Defense Front. Furthermore, the failure of Donziger's case in New York suggests something even more, a kind of legal neocolonialism. The failure of a legal case about the Amazon basin in New York, after decades of legal proceedings, shows how difficult it is for indigenous groups in the global south to bring a case against powerful multinational corporations in the global north. The indigenous people's fate was determined thousands of miles from their home, where the odds were stacked against them from the start. So a long fight for environmental justice continues. The people of the Amazon basin remain just as distant from their goal as ever. Meanwhile, the Waorani wait.